a mid-sized agency looking to engender change, I think you have to engender autonomy, and by doing that you have to give them more responsibility, give them a bigger remit to grow into. It goes back to that Frankenstein thing. They've been growing in this space where they're doing identities while sort of thinking about where it's got to live, and that beautiful amalgamation has something unique. Packaging stuff up is a really important part of like leadership roles. Fundamentally, clients need to buy the stuff. So being able to say to them, look, we can give you brand identities, we can give you campaign identities.
Welcome everyone to the Untalented Podcast. I've got Lorenzo Fruzza here with me today. This is actually the first one I've done in a while, so it could be a bit rusty, but hopefully not. But I'm really excited because Lorenzo is currently the Chief Design Officer at Havas.
That's correct.
Havas London, and I think that has got some really interesting opinions on the industry, obviously. I think actually is the only Chief CDO in London right now.
At time of recording.
That could change. But yeah, welcome. How are you doing?
Yeah, good. I was saying it's a lovely space to be in. Feel very relaxed now.
Right, well, that's how we want people to feel. But we'll kick off with the first question, which is, who was the first person to make you feel talented?
And my answer is cheesy as hell. Cheese is
fine.
It's my mum. I mean, that's sort of how sort of a good therapy session starts, doesn't it? No, I think I grew up in a house where like she was like a textile designer. That's where she met my dad at art school, and now she paints. She's a really good painter, but from a young age, she always encouraged my drawing, and that's I think that's been the backbone of a lot of my creativity. It's still probably something I enjoy more than design. I love drawing, I love illustration, always have done. And I think it's one of those things where it feels closer to your own expression, and it feels like there's less compromise there. I think that's a really, really important thing, and sort of to be recognised by her from such a young age. Because I was like, such a young age, but like, no, I think it definitely. It's funny. She recently, I showed her a piece of work. She started commenting on it, like design work, and I was like, "Mum, you're not a designer." But still, like the stuff she was saying, there was still like a beautiful sort of nuggets in there around composition and layout. So it's, yeah, my mum.
That is beautiful, and I think actually most people, they'll reference like a teacher or a grandparent, or it seems like it's, obviously we've asked the first person to make you feel talented, and I've never heard like my first boss, or so it's quite interesting. I think that the formative years of your life as a human being really inspire you to like continue doing that, because I think that, so I guess that means you grew up in a relatively like creative environment as like a young kid.
Yeah, I think my dad was a furniture designer, and I think he was really handy and really good in like 3D stuff. But I think he kind of ended up working in the world of like sort of like shop installations and shop fitting.
Yeah.
So he kind of went a little bit away from the more creative side of it. But definitely that was a big kind of impetus in the house, and it was definitely, creativity was encouraged a lot.
Yeah.
More so, it's funny that having kids myself, like you realise how structured we are now compared to back in the 80s when it was all a bit more wild. But I think it definitely helped me to sort of find my kind of confidence and alignment from like a young age, which I will always be grateful for, because I think without that, I think it would have been much harder.
Yeah, because I think that I was thinking about this recently, but are we doing enough in education to like teach kids about creative things? Like obviously you've grown up in an environment where, you know, inherently things are being created around you, and you're talking about creative stuff, but like with kids yourself, do they do creative stuff in school?
It's really, you know what, it's I have to say, like, so I've got a 5-year-old now, and it's really interesting plugging back into that world and kind of seeing the state of where it's at. He goes to like just a normal state school. It's a lovely school. It's really kind of like balanced in terms of the people who go there. And it's balanced in terms of their kind of focus on academics and arts. There's a lovely, I think in his lifetime, I think places like that will not be the problem. I think there's so much going on around that. I think there's a lot of culpability with parents. I think it's easy to push it onto the schools, but I think so much of your education happens at home.
Yeah.
What we kind of engender there and what we kind of empower there, I think it can have a more profound effect on the school, the effect school can have on you, and then the friends that can have on you there. That base, it's exactly that. That's your base.
Yeah.
But no, I think in terms of institutions, I think it's actually probably getting better. I think there's more a holistic approach to things. I think the arts, if you look at like A levels and sort of degrees now, there's more and more creative like ones being spun up all the time.
Yeah.
Which you're going to need, because the job market for when he graduates, I can't even, it fills me with terror and hope. Nope, mostly terror, like what he's going to be looking at in terms of a job prospect.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the industry is changing so fast, isn't it? Even when, well, that's, leads us on nicely to, did you always set out to be a designer? I remember you having quite an amazing first job in the creative field.
Yes. No, absolutely not. I think I even when I studied illustration, but even at that point, I was hedging my bets. I was applying to St Martin's and the Guildhall to do acting. So I still wasn't fully decided which I was going to go in for. Had an awful audition at the Guildhall, got in St Martin's. I was like, right, I'll do that. A year later, it's like, okay, now time to do a degree. I'll apply to the Guildhall again. And I'll go to see if I can get into Camberwell to do illustration. Another like mind-bendingly awful audition at the Guildhall, got into do illustration. So then I was kind of, again, to be brutally honest, like just coasting a little bit. I like drawing. I thought illustration's a good fit. Did that for 3 years. And then I kind of came out of there. I thought, fuck, what do you do with an illustration degree? Make no money. Like, and then, so I had to kind of like sort of think a little bit more broadly. Went to a few graduate fairs. Ended up meeting a couple of reps from AMV, which I didn't know anything about. When I went to the business, when I went to the office, I was like, which floor are you on? They were like, oh, the whole building. I was like, yeah, this is pretty significant. But I actually, I met a guy there who was spinning up this bizarre little department called the Inspiration Department. I mean, you can tell this was 2006, just before the crunch. And like these kind of things were gaining some kind of traction. And it wasn't a bad idea. It was basically like a sort of a bit more of a multidisciplinary like research department. You could come to that department for image searches, audio searches, research searches. And my role was a cultural scanner, which is as wanky as it sounds and as ridiculous. And essentially I was running their internal little MTV channel, doing like publishing a lot of this stuff internally as like a constant stream of inspiration. I kind of came in on that pretext, but whilst I was there, I started kind of like working with people, doing some scamps, doing like visualizations, doing a bit of design, doing a bit of illustration. And that, I mean, to be honest, that kind of a little bit of doing a bit of everything is kind of how I got into it. It was like, make yourself available, be hungry, chat to people. And then I think it was about just earning the trust on the little bits.
Yeah.
It wasn't even until I then moved jobs. Well, I got made redundant, as most people did at that point, which is actually it's a sobering thing to have like 9 months into your working career. You all of a sudden think, hang on, there's nothing stable here. It is one long freelance gig, really. And I took it pretty badly. But then after that, I think it was good because it changed my outlook on it a little bit.
Yeah.
And I felt very much up for trying anything.
Yeah.
I went into my new job as a visualizer, lied about everything I could do. Awful mistake, got put on a pitch, got asked to like lay out this book, Design and InDesign, never used it before. I started setting up a book file. No one knows what that is. Like still now I ask people, do you know what a book file is? No one knows what it is. I set up the whole thing like that, and the designer at like midnight says, what have you done? Like, this is all completely wrong. And I was like, I don't know. And like literally, I think the only reason I didn't get fired is because they needed more work the next day. But I don't know where I was going with that. But I think the fact is, it's like there was a bit of an attitude at that point of like, I'll give it a go. I'll go in here. And I mean, I didn't slack. I worked super hard, did long hours. You don't kind of care at that age. But yeah, it was definitely not a well-planned course. It was a bit reactive, but at the same time, I think that, again, that sort of openness to try and openness to like to put in the hours, and it is interesting how translatable a lot of like visual storytelling is.
Yeah. The challenging thing about design actually is that you do need the barrier to entry is quite high. You can't just walk out of college with no experience on InDesign or knowing how to set up a book file.
Yeah.
You need that.
Yeah.
And if you haven't been practically trained, it is hard to move into the design world. I think that maybe the creative side is slightly different because you're, ideating and, yes, there's lots of important practical skills, but it is quite a, you need to know what you're doing in a design role.
Absolutely. And like, that's the thing. It's like, I was lucky in a way that I was given enough permission to learn a lot on the job. Because I didn't have a lot of that. I had like Photoshop and Illustrator, self-taught, but nothing in InDesign, and all of that I had to learn very quickly on the job.
Yeah.
But it is interesting how the kind of the prerequisite, because we're makers, there's a tangible output that you have to be able to deliver.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting one to grapple with now because there's so many different outputs. I think we have to be really smart about how we set up our teams.
Yeah.
And how we think about design, because I think it's crazy to expect everyone to be able to output every type of work we do.
Yeah.
So how do we manage that going forward? How do we bring designers into the industry in a way where they're not going to be turned away because they don't know that program, and we're not going to miss out on talent just because they're not kind of like trained in the right way?
Yeah. Do you remember when your first, let's call it your first role as a designer, what was your view of the industry then? What did it feel like?
In terms of design, or just in terms of the industry as a whole?
I guess the industry as a whole, really.
It felt like, you know what, it felt, I think, because of where I was at the time, it felt, it didn't feel very creative, but that's because this is the thing, creativity in my head was something much more personal. It's something that you have and you express yourself through. And I remember feeling it was very transactional, and there was little opportunities to do little bits of sort of like creativity or craft. But it did feel quite, it didn't necessarily feel like a place that you could blossom as a creative, as an artist.
Yeah.
I think, and I think it also, I always was blown away by how tumultuous it always felt. Like it always felt like, well, it's not too different now, but like the hours are super long then. I mean, they were insane. They're definitely better now. But I remember thinking, there's such an intensity around this, which is quite exciting. But at the same time, it's like made me think like I didn't see any 60-year-old designers, probably because they're dead, absolutely burnt out. It's very different to where it is now, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's seen so much change. What's the most significant shift you've seen?
From then to now, I think overall it's the nature and the places in which we're expected to turn up as people who express brands. I think that has been and I think what I think is interesting about that change is it's been so subtle. I think people have failed to recognize actually what that means. Like longer than that, go back 60 years ago, like you had like print ads, which was a very specific remit, which did a very, very specific job.
Yeah.
Now, with the kind of the advent, I think, of like the interactive space, social, I think there's such a fundamental shift in the way brands need to behave, that it's the ask from advertising, the ask from comms, the ask for identities is completely different now to even it was 10 years ago. Like the need for like design governance right at the very top for a brand to actually turn up in all of these places and the next places they're going to turn up in a week's time. It requires a completely different skill set, and I think it's like I find it insane that common sense isn't universally recognized. We still talk about design in the same terms as we did 15, 20 years ago. And what's quite interesting is you get like these new flashy things pop up, digital popped up, and like, wow, digital designers, they get paid loads. And then all of a sudden that just gets kind of integrated, and it all of a sudden becomes less of a specialism. But there's no recognition of that. There's no recognition of that original thing we call designers to change now, because it now does this and it now does this, and they can now think about that. So it's like this weird Frankenstein thing that's occurred, and that's, I think, I mean, that's, yes, it's relevant to design, but I think it's relevant to the whole industry. Like watching how especially like at Havas, like a medium-sized agency, like medium-sized agencies grappling with that landscape shift. Because you get the little boutique ones who pop up, like, we just do social, and like super lithe, super tight, able to service one specific aspect. But that's part of a brand fabric, isn't it? It's like brands need to, yes, they need to do social, but they still need to do above the line.
Yeah.
And those two things need to feel the same, and trying to give the governance, the guidance that sits over the top of that.
Yeah.
I think that's incredibly valuable, but I think it's you have to recognize that it's not the same as before.
Yeah.
It's not just like a growing thing, it's a different beast now. I think you have to, first step to radical acceptance is literally like looking at this, recognizing that it's different, and then framing the way you deal with it in a different way.
Do you think, so if you were to, what is the best way to enable, do you need absolute experts or do you need generalists? Like what does an ideal team structure look like for you, for an agency to do the best work possible? For
design or in general?
Mostly design.
Yeah. I think you definitely, because of where we're at the moment, and I think because this landscape's only getting more complicated, you need a team that kind of is fundamentally built around the ability to see the big picture. I think within that, there's definitely like specs, like our team, like we've got kind of certain core principles that are mandatories for members of the team. So our designers, they need to have craft, obviously. That's like a prerequisite, it always has been for design. But the two big things that I think are drivers in the team now are like, they need to be conceptual. Most designers are. I think it's really interesting where people haven't made that definition within agencies, when you get those blended teams of like part studio, part design. Designers getting frustrated because they're doing studio jobs, and studio guys being asked more of potentially than they want to do. Separate that, firstly. But then with that, like, recognize that designers are conceptual, challenge them and embrace that, because I think that is I mean, Jesus Christ, they're visual storytellers. They're literally day in, day out, they're practicing a visual language. So you would want to allow them to sort of flex and do that. And then the functional side, and I think that's the biggest overlooked thing, like the fundamental need for functionality in the comms world now. It's real. It's not just something reserved for building websites. Like, there's the designers need to think a lot more functionally. How does something work? Why does it work? What's the interactiveness of it? And again, it's one of those things where that for me is as important as craft, because it's if it looks beautiful, it's useless unless it does what it needs to do. So for me, like, building a team around those three principles, skill set, I think it's interesting because a lot of the traditional skill sets are still relevant, but I think stuff like motion's a bit of a prerequisite now. I think you need to think of brands in sequence as opposed to in static, just because that's where most of us interact with them. But you don't have to do it all with one person. That's the beauty of like a good, strong team. Like, we've got I'm super lucky, I've got a super talented team, so I don't actually have to do anything good. They just make me look great. But we've got like across the team, like we've got a senior designer who's really good, really conceptual, and another one who's really good at systems. Between the two of them, they can always generate like beautiful, hardworking results. They don't need to be exactly the same, and I think you get, so I'd say like a good blend that meets those requirements, but not necessarily like everyone having to be held to the same set of expertise.
Because I think actually, when you started, were designers expected to be be because in my mind, that's a really significant shift, especially within, campaign or creative or above the line agencies. Designers aren't just production teams; they're not just studio teams anymore. Everyone is expecting a designer to also come up with ideas, and I think that is a big change.
It's absolutely, and I think it's 100% not the case still. Like in a lot of places, I think there is. A lot of the modern designers coming up now, sort of like I say modern designers, but like young designers, you're right. They will naturally lean into that conceptual space more. It's definitely not the status quo in terms of agencies, and I think unlocking that is a big key to unlocking the value of design. But also you have to make sure, I think, the designers you have in your team are up for it, because that's that thing I said about like separating out who wants to work in studio versus be a designer. that's an honest conversation you need to have across agencies, because not every person who works in a design studio is necessarily going to want to do that kind of more conceptual side. And it is different, and it's just a different ask of a person.
Yeah.
And it's not for everyone. But I think, yeah, I can't remember what you originally said there.
No. I guess sort of fast forwarding from that kind of first formalised design role, you're now the chief design officer at Havas. So for anyone who doesn't know what a chief design officer does, what is the day-to-day like for you? What are you there to do?
It's funny, like a lot of it is about like basically educating people about design, championing the value of what we do. I think for the initial chunk of like working up to the role, it was all about making our design product tight, and that was less about just doing the work and more about like designing the process to how we get to the work, looking at what we need to change around that. That's really important. And then working and devising and developing actual products that fall out of it. All of that kind of stuff. Like, I think packaging stuff up is a really important part of like leadership roles, because fundamentally clients need to buy the stuff. So being able to say to them, look, we can give you brand identities, we can give you campaign identities, we can do campaign refreshes, brand evolutions, we can do like brand consultations where we kind of consult on a bigger brand thought for some of their other aspects of this business. Developing and productizing them is actually quite an exciting part of the role, because that's kind of a big part of like elevating the status of design and elevating the perceived value of it. That's the main chunk of what I'm doing at the moment, but the long term is like the role will be around continuing to develop those products, a lot more customer facing, client facing sort of aspects to the role, because there's a job to be done to kind of bring them over to the idea of working a little bit differently. Maybe not going with a branding agency, working with us to kind of bring their brand challenge closer to their consumer insights, and that's what we can offer. So it's been a lot of education and a lot of kind of like both for internally and for clients to kind of get everyone to understand that. And then in terms of the work, again, it's actually it's my favorite role I've had in my career, because I'm able to work with all these brilliant, bright designers, challenge them, be challenged back about how we can push on, how we can get more conceptual, how we can really like use our functional brains to ask the question, well, why are we making that? Is there a better thing to make? And nurturing and growing that and giving them structure to grow excellence within is kind of the other sort of main chunk of it. I occasionally do some work, actual work, which is nice. But I'm okay with the stuff being more realised through the relationships and through the people within the team.
So do you find having conversations with clients challenging? Like, because my interpretation of, they understand creative, they understand working with, campaign, but do they not realise they're working with design at that point? Like, what do you find yourself sort of educating them on?
I think it's of the value of taking the time in the right places is key. Like most of the projects we do we'll have an appropriate discovery phase and a distill phase, and those two phases are phases that didn't exist before we kind of like changed our offering. So it's a new cost. It sits much further up the process. They have to pay for some of it even before they even get briefed from the creative. So convincing them of the value of that is kind of a big thing. But I think we've had a really good success rate of like even those challenging conversations at the beginning. When we've gone through it, it's paid dividends, because it's like it's one of the key differences of something you have to do when you look beyond the world of comms, because you have to be much more rigorous. You have to know what you're designing is going to work. You have to know that the kind of the ideas you're bringing to life are going to translate into all these different spaces that they need to live in. But yeah, trying to convince anyone to give me more money at the beginning to do this thing which they didn't have to do before, they're like, well, why do I need to do that? But it has been, and we've had more and less success with different clients, but the ones that have got it and got on board, you just get much richer work, much more valuable work, and also a much richer understanding from them around like actually like the world's only going to get more fragmented and confusing, the more of this kind of smart, flexible, and adaptive thinking we put at the beginning of our processes, the more kind of future-proof we're going to be as a brand. And definitely, it's helped the designers to like organize a thought and like navigate some of the more tricky and sprawling briefs.
Yeah, for sure. This is something that I love to do, but you can choose either your child or a grandparent. How would you describe what you do day to day to them?
You know what? Luckily, I don't have any grandparents left, because I think it's well, I was going to say, because I always struggle with that one. I feel like they're different ends of the extreme, but they require different things. I think grandparents, you'd need to give it with a certain amount of the role is nuanced. So to my son, I say we go to work and we make pictures that tell stories. Sometimes I say we make things that tell stories. But I like that, and he gets it, and it's true. It's like literally like everything we do needs to express the brand, right? And every format. So it's design should be able to translate big ideas into every possible touch point. So I'm not lying to him. I think it's just in a language that he understands, and we do make pictures. So it's a fair point.
Yeah, and I think that it's so true. It's like I sometimes think we overcomplicate life from a work perspective, and we use lots of explorative language about how we do things, but ultimately the fact is that is what you do, and that's what lots of creative and designers do. I think another thing that is worth mentioning is that a lot of frustration that I feel from heads of design or senior design members of advertising departments is that design is not put at the same level as creative in their team, or they're not even given the same opportunity to be part of board meetings, or but Havas has made a really big statement with adding you into the upper leadership team. Design is very much at the forefront of the business. How does that? Do you agree with that? Does that resonate with you? How is that?
Yeah, fuck yeah. No, definitely. No, I think it's been so long coming. I think to the points of like the fact that the landscape has changed, the need for a voice at the top, a voice who knows about how to translate and make the work. Because all of that beautiful strategy, all of those powerful ideas, it's absolutely fruitless unless it's actually translated into something that people see and understand and feel. And that's what designers are experts in. Why would you not want that voice on that top table? It's not the same as 20 years ago when it was a really narrow thing and you could direct that. That kind of like really kind of varied landscape has got so many different touch points. That expertise of how to translate it into them it adds so much more value having that voice higher up and having that voice earlier on.
Yeah.
Because designers are going to see things that other people don't see. They're going to think about different ways in that other people don't. And we're not replacing anyone. We're adding a voice that's going to make the work better. This is why I've struggled, why there's resistance to this. Because it's like, in every aspect of my logical brain, it makes sense. In other industries, they have it. Advertising is one of those weird ones that's kind of like gravitated towards a slightly older model for whatever reason. And yeah, there's been a historical role for design, I think, post the kind of sort of rock star era of like print designers years ago. Like I think design probably did take a little bit of a backseat to the idea. But the ask is different now. And it's not about being the big ideas thinker. It's about being the big and powerful translators of those ideas, knowing those three fundamental areas: concept, function, and craft. Being able to hold them at the same time, and develop these kind of like these like system thoughts that allow us to kind of play in all those different spaces.
Yeah, we spoke before about a necessary tension between creative and design. I love the idea of that. Almost sounds poetic. Like, is that important? A tension between creative and design?
I think it is important, and I think both parties are fundamentally responsible for the visual storytelling, but from slightly different angles. And I think the respect needs to be held on both sides. But there is like one should be vested in the purity of the big idea, and one should be vested in the accurate and amplified translation of that idea. And those two should have sometimes on the same page, sometimes have slightly different points of view on it. But I think we're both coming together to make the best possible work.
Yeah.
That needs to always be held in our minds. Like, this should be a collaborative process to get to that best work. But yeah, again, there's bad tension where I think some of the legacy and the ownership of the idea gets in the way of making the good work. Whereas actually, if you were sort of coming to it fresh, you'd be like, this makes perfect sense. Two experts coming together to make the best stuff. But yeah, I think probably unlike those other industries like tech, digital, who are much newer, don't have the legacy. I think we've got a bit of that, which sometimes muddies the water. But it's getting less.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think that it's you want, from my understanding, you want periods of tension where people are pushing each other to do better, and I think that can come in the form of helpful feedback, or can we do this differently? I'm not sure that's the right track, but as long as it's not destructive or grabby about this is my thing, I don't want anyone else to touch it. So yeah, I love that. I think that's a really interesting way to look at it.
Just to zero in on one little bit, I love working with creatives, and what they do for me is they hold me to account and they push me further. And sometimes I can get fixated on a solution and I'm like, no, but it works. And I'll get pushed and prodded because they feel it won't be the purest articulation, and I will have to go away and come up with a new way in, which will be better. I do think designers, because we are responsible for making it, there can be a slightly full stopness to like, nope, we've decided it's this now. Whereas I think the closer you are to the idea, like, could we try this? Could we try that? And there's a big fuck off tension there because you're like, it's midnight, I don't want to do any more work. But in there is sometimes a difference between good and great. And like sometimes that little, albeit irritating push out of that kind of stubborn endpoint will kind of push us to better work. So I think there is a good tension there, even if sometimes it feels uncomfortable and rage-inducing.
Yeah. I won't name the agency that I'm talking about, but I spoke to a design director from there, and they do brilliant work, consistent, have a good reputation. And then I was like, what is the secret to doing great work all the time? And I was expecting some like sort of kumbaya chant in the morning that inspires creativity, and she was like, we just work really fucking hard. Like, we literally don't stop until it's perfect. And I think that is just the nature of good work, isn't it? Challenging people, not stopping until everyone's like, we've done the best we can here.
Yeah.
And I think that, as frustrating as that is, and that potentially means that you work really long hours and you do that, but is that the secret to good creative work? Maybe, I don't know. In terms of, because we spoke a little bit about the importance of craft in your team, and that being one of the key aspects of how you build your teams, what can be done to raise craft or design craft in a design team?
I think it's interesting. I think it depends of the, if we're talking about like design team and agencies, I think it's probably recognizing that the role of designing it is probably more than just craft. I think the second you start to kind of open up the fact that sort of designers offer these other attributes, the craft follows. If you give them more agency to have more of a steer on the concept, if you give them more agency to like think more about the strategic functional problem rather than just the end result, the craft will follow, and often the idea will be purer, and that kind of the overcrafting will be less needed. The amount of times you see, I have definitely seen stuff there like, fix it with design, and you think, but everything else is broken here. Like, no, there's no craft that will make this not broken. But I think that, for me, that engenders the designers with more of a desire to make better work, because that's the fundamental thing. You say that place they work hard. Like, I think you want to get to a place where your designers are turned on and hungry and wanting to deliver what you're asking for, and then 10% of something you aren't. And I think it can, depending on where you're at, if you're like a startup, I think vision goes a long way to kind of inspiring that. But if you're like a mid-sized agency looking to engender change, I think you have to engender autonomy, and by doing that you have to give them more responsibility, give them a bigger remit to grow into. I think that's been my general feeling in mid-sized agencies, but I do recognise it's so different depending on where you are, depending on the kind of the size, the structure, the kind of the vision of the people at the top.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a long way of saying give them more freedom.
Yeah.
Get better craft.
But I think that is there's a lot in that though, isn't there? You know, we've all worked in businesses where you feel like you're in charge of a tiny little thing and you can't make much impact, and then you know the shackles come off, you go to a different place, or you change team, or you get a promotion, and suddenly you're much more inspired, you want to do more, you're not looking at the clock thinking, God, I need to get out of this place. You know, you're in control of your own destiny. I think that is so important, and people forget that is what you need to really be in control of stuff.
It's blown my mind. We've brought designers in over the years, and we've had them in, and I've been blown away by the fact that they weren't being utilised this in previous places. They weren't being asked for their kind of thoughts on how to like progress the story. They won't be this, and they'll tell me anecdotally like briefs they would get, and I was thinking, Jesus Christ, like that agency is like missing a chance to make better work. Simply because of these preconceptions, and these preconceived constraints of who should do what. Yeah, such a waste.
Yeah, it is. I mean, that and we could talk for hours on that. There's structurally some really strange things that happen in agencies. In terms of like the future of advertising or design, like what's out there scaring you? Maybe positively scaring you. What you like? Wow, that's terrifyingly good.
I think the obvious one. I mean, I think in terms of like, I think AI is a funny one because I think AI doesn't scare me. Famous last words. Just because I think where we're headed at in terms of design in the comms world. I think if we aim for this kind of more organisational thinking, where we're more about thinking about the nuance of design and how it's kind of instructed across all these different platforms, AI becomes a really like powerful tool. I think. I mean, what scares me about the future? I mean, fucking recessions scare me because it's like I think there is a reality. Like I think in times when money's more tight, I think clients get less brave. Rightly so. They kind of and they look to stuff that looks like any kind of extension beyond need and be like, let's cut that. And I think that would mean we could see ourselves taking a bit of a step backwards. In terms of design, because it's always the newest thing to kind of get up, gets pushed back down. But again, I believe in what we're doing. I believe in the product. I believe in the strength of it. Like it's not. We will continue to like push for design to have a bigger seat. But I mean, they feel like two relatively scary-ish things.
I think that's a fair scary thing that you've referenced. In terms of the future of your own team, we've spoken a little bit about this. I think that what are you looking to build? You know, a new-ish role. You know, a new-ish. You know, a more of a focus on vision and outwardly facing stuff. Like, what are you building? What are you?
I think. I mean, we're at the core. Like more than the role, we're building a new discipline. We're building this. We're calling it Brand X, short for like brand expression design. And we're trying to build a discipline which actually encapsulates everything we do. Like that's and it sounds silly and obvious because it is ridiculous and obvious. Like you've got all these designers who, when they get asked, "What do you do?" "Oh, I do a bit of digital, do a bit of graphic design." Like, why is there not a term which talks to the entirety of that? Why is there not like a discipline which encapsulates the real value of that, which is the ability to be able to do all those things and think in all those ways? That is what's valuable. That is the bigger like visual storytelling, like think power that's behind it all. So that's the biggest part of developing this role will be developing that offering, making Brand X a ubiquitous thing that people know about. People know when they say, "Oh, Brand X means you can do da 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 da," and it's incredibly hard. And I think it's interesting in terms of my kind of core role. Like I've got kind of tiers in how we do that. One, I make it robust and make it a product that makes sense within the company, then to our clients, and then to everyone else. But it is working, and it's amazing seeing how starting to give the designers more structure and more definition about their value has a tangible difference on how they behave, how they create work. Because I think definitions are really powerful. They give such clarity and importance. The chief design officer role, like it's in theory just another head of discipline role, but it's important that it's seen with parity, because I think it makes it's funny how, I mean, there's a part of me that sort of resists all this kind of like name wang, but it does make a difference. It does make a difference in the way people perceive stuff. Like the conversations I have now with like CMOs are completely different to like when I was head of design. They shouldn't be. I'm the same person saying the same stuff, but it just carries a different weight. Yeah. Which I do loathe, but I recognise the importance of it.
Yeah. And is that, so from a brand expression perspective, what is included in that kind of offering? Is it brand strategy? Is it more traditional design? Like how are you making that definition?
So it's essentially like we concern ourselves with everywhere brand expresses itself, literally, and we chose that very pointedly because comms didn't cover it all. The designers will have clarity and expertise in how to brand a product. They will be able to do brand identities, but also they will also have the expertise to understand how that brand identity translates to a piece of communications, a campaign piece of communication. So understanding how to turn on the right bits from that brand identity, but still give freedom for that campaign to have cut through. So it's everywhere within that remit, and it is a genuine skill set. It's different to what you do at branding houses, because I think branding houses, they don't do the comms stuff. They don't often build with the correct flexibility you need for comms. Every time you see an advert in a branding document, on the whole, it's a template. It's a very well branded template. But we know from making comms for the last 60 years that that's exactly what you don't need. You need something that's going to stop people, that's going to look different, but have enough of the brand tone left in it so you know where it's from. Yeah. So designing that in a holistic space is what is the edges of brand X. It's the stuff that the guys in design have already been doing, but it goes back to that Frankenstein thing. They've been growing in this space where they're doing identities while sort of thinking about where it's got to live, and that beautiful amalgamation has something unique. Yeah, let's draw some edges around that. Not even convince people, show people how valuable it is, and make it its own thing. Yeah. And I speak to people about it, and they're like, and I look at their face and they're like, that's nothing new. This is the thing. It's not radical change. This is like radical acceptance of what's already valuable. So that's the thing. I've basically just put some edges around something that's already there and claimed it's something new, but it is something new, and it is something super valuable.
Yeah, no, I think it's really interesting, and I think that it gives more, again, ownership and power for design and design teams to, have that thing that you own, which you can sell, I'm sure, to clients outside of maybe some of the campaign stuff as well, which then gives you your own client base. And I think that's really, really interesting. It doesn't mean that I have to come to Havas just for one thing. You can, and building that reputation, I think, is really, really interesting.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, that's part of the story already. I think we've already started to sort of have more and more of an active role with our clients, talking to them about stuff, and it's been interesting seeing how it's kind of unlocked different bits, and we keep on getting invited back to like, oh, can you come and just have a chat to this internal team about this, or like da-da-da-da, which is lovely because it means that we're doing the right things in the right place, because it's only going to get more valuable. Yeah. That's the thing. Like the guidance and the stewardship of brands, how they turn up, how they sound, how they feel, how you get them feeling the same whilst flexing appropriately. Because AI is only going to make it worse, I think, for a while. You're just going to get a sea of same and a sea of randomness. Yeah. Because everyone's going to be having a go. So that design governance, I think, should only get more and more valuable.
I'm curious to hear your opinion on this, because I think that the average human being is becoming much more involved or knowledgeable or aware of design, and they may not know it's design, but aesthetically they'll see apps or things on their phone or things out in the world. Advertising is everywhere. Do you think like the average Joe is becoming more critical maybe of bad work?
Absolutely. I think probably more I don't know if it's necessarily a conscious thing, but everyone is being trained incredibly well, especially from a functional point of view, to be aware when something doesn't work, when it breaks, or when it doesn't feel right. I think there's a really, going back to that kind of the functional role of design and why it's so important is because it's like a goalkeeper now. No one notices when it's working, but if it doesn't work, if something doesn't feel right, people are like, oh, I don't like this, or like the performance of your ads, especially in like a sort of an interactive space on Instagram. It's even like thinking about stuff like how you use carousels on Instagram, something really basic like that, but there's a functional ask there of how you translate the storytelling in a different set of like static sequences. Like even that stuff, there is like best practice, non-best practice, and knowing how to get that right. Again, I don't imagine the punter to think, oh, that doesn't feel right, that jars, but I do imagine they flick one out board onto the next.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a subconscious like level of criticism or level of kind of appraisal of the work that I think is now getting hard coded more and more in people.
Well, we were talking, weren't we, about the sketches? Was it Jamie Redknapp?
Yeah.
Was it?
Yeah.
Like one of the worst things I've ever seen in my life. And I can't imagine someone to look at that and think, oh, that really feels like something that I enjoy.
Yeah.
But maybe they've nailed their consumer base. I don't know. I don't know much about sketches, but
I just think it was a fucking awful ad. I mean, apologies if the person who made it is watching, but like seriously, it's terrible.
yeah. Slip-on shoes.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm quite there, but maybe you are.
I mean, yeah. If it's on camera, but fantastic.
Different kind of shoe, though, isn't it? Different kind of shoe. Okay, so in terms of we've talked about kind of your role right now, the kind of direction you're going. I think a lot of, and especially a lot of people who actually listen to this, are people who are curious about the industry or are studying or wanting to advice on how to get in. How do you try and inspire young designers or young creatives to join your team, or like what would you say to someone looking to join the industry?
Interesting. I mean, there's two different things there. How if I were trying to recruit someone, I think I'd just lie massively and say how great it is. No, I'd be honest, and I'd sort of talk to. Yeah, I think to get people in our team, I would tell them the truth about the fact that if you come work with us, you'll be in a position where you're given these freedoms. You'll be expected to sort of be more free thinking, but that will be an agency you have there, because I think a lot of people are very attracted to that. But inspiring someone to go into the industry, I think there are. I hope there is going to be more and more space for designers like this, where the kind of the true value and the sort of the beautiful variety of sort of thinking that designers can bring to the table is recognised. And I think if that does start to become realised, it is one of the most exciting places to practice visual storytelling, because of the variety, because of the challenges, the different types of brands, different places they need to live. Like that's the one massive boon I would say we have over a lot of the other design-based industries is the variety. And yes, there's some fucking awful brands out there, and you have to do some bad work. But like the spectrum of stretch your brain gets in having to think about that, and hopefully now with like more permission to think more widely, it should be a very, if we put the permissions in the right place, it should be a very exciting place for designers to go.
Yeah.
And they will start to naturally, like as we're seeing with more agencies, all of that elusive branding work, that is going to start coming into comms agencies, I believe. Like I think you're going to get a more connected offering from a few different places.
Yeah.
So you are getting to do that kind of genesis work, but at the same time, you're also getting to do some really fun and light sort of, and very kind of like, I guess, more kind of aesthetically driven sort of campaign work.
Yeah. I heard, I can't remember who had said it to me, but we were talking about younger designers or people joining the industry, and there's a kind of an uneasiness about doing the shit brief, because they want to do the best work and they want to do the most exciting stuff. And they said there's no such thing as a shit brief. There's an opportunity to do better work for that client. There probably is still a shit brief, but I like that way of thinking.
Oh my God. And as a manager, that when you see designers who do that, it's a dream, because like, and yeah, it's we've got a lot of the guys in the team who, well, I would say like all of our team approach stuff in that same way, and I think it's such a everything has the opportunity to be better, and sort of recognizing that and that being an approach, and being realistic, it's hard to be like that all the time. But even if you're like that, like 90% of the time, there's the amount of jewels that have come out of briefs that you look at and you think that's not going to be any good. We had a piece of award-winning work years ago, and it's for like Gaviscon, and you think like heartburn stuff that's not going to like render anything particularly nice, but the work that was done out of it was just like gorgeous, like packaging design, print design, all out of one little seed that just grew. And that's where I think actually like empowering the designers to have a little bit more steer of the functionality of the brief, ask the question, what are we making? Is that the best thing we can make?
Yeah.
Even just having that permission, that changes the way you think about briefs. You don't think, oh, this is a pre-decided thing where I have to do this. You're challenged a little bit like, well, what do you think? How can we make it better? And again, it's not for everyone, but if you are up for it, then I think that is a really exciting piece of permission to have as a designer.
Yeah. What do you think is one really important quality or skill that someone entering the design space needs to possess?
Just one,
or two or three?
I think it's a really tricky question, because you've got that kind of that. I think practically a blended team is always really good. So I think it's not about sort of a practical thing, but I think it's actually what we just said there. It's like it's the drive to get the best out of every brief. I think that I don't want to say it's a generational thing, because it's not, because I think you see it thing. That sort of thing of like waiting for the good brief is toxic. And I think as a real, that is the enemy, as the polar opposite. I think the opposite to that, so the desire to embrace and be curious and push every brief is the single best quality, because that will only mean you will get better, your work will get better, your career will progress. I firmly believe that. I think that's sort of the core of you. Any good manager can work with that. It's brilliant. And it just does that paired with like a desire to learn and a desire to take in feedback. Yeah. There you can work, you can develop anything else. You can develop sort of technical bits, but that's, you can't manufacture that.
Yeah. It's almost like a sort of problem solving ability, or actually, you know, I don't know if more junior designers get the opportunities to do this, but it's like coaching a client to make better decisions, and not them not really being aware that you're pushing them creatively. Yeah. I think that's a huge skill, and again, you might be the only person who can action that day to day, but seeing that in action from you, or from a creative, or from like a design director, I think is really, it's like an untapped skill in a lot of people. Yeah. I've spoken with someone was on the podcast talking about one of the key things they love to see in someone is spotting an opportunity to offshoot and do something slightly different with a client. You know, seeing an opportunity, yes, they might have briefed us on this, but how about we try and pitch something else into them, which is going to really, you know, wrap up this brief in a really interesting way. Yeah. So, yeah.
I think that's really, I mean, I think we talk a lot about being able to like actively listen and actively workshop in meetings. Yeah. I think it can be a really, really powerful tool, especially with clients. If you're able to like go into a room and hold your sort of opinions lightly, like have strong opinions but hold them lightly, I think there's you could do so much more if you can listen. Actually, what are they actually saying? Work with that, like to your point, like work with little offshoots, grow them. But getting that takes a lot of experience, I think, and it takes a lot of little ego, because you have to be able to sort of park something you've been making and love to potentially make something better. But yeah, it's something we actually try and encourage, and something we try and grow through like sharing experiences, talking through our work to one another, asking how we could have made it better. Like just practicing as a team is actually super helpful for that, because until we get more and more exposure, it's good to almost like simulate those moments and simulate that kind of active listening.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually hadn't considered that before, but almost practicing it within your team first to then allow it to grow with clients. Nice. So we're coming towards the end. We've got about 10 minutes left. I'm curious to find out. We'll split this in two sections.
Yep.
The first section is going to be your most memorable, pinch me, exciting, great moment in your career.
Mm-hmm.
The second one is going to be the most humiliating, embarrassing, get me out of this situation.
You may want to edit the last one out, but I'll say it anyway.
So
I don't know if yeah, let's see.
The first one, like, and it doesn't have to be one moment. Is there any moments in your career that you've been like, wow, this is really fucking cool?
So weirdly, it was cool is not the right, the pinch me moment. I think it was, so this role, I proposed it. I went to my chief creative officer and we were talking like we do our kind of like yearly get together to talk about development. And I knew I wanted to develop my role. So we talked a lot. We talked about the role, talked about the name, talked about the remit. But it was the first time in my career I felt like I'd made an extension of my own back. Like it wasn't someone coming to me and offering me a role or I felt nervous as fuck. I felt super overextended. I was like, okay, well, I'm actually putting some out there and sort of finding out if people think I'm good enough to do this. And it was a funny thing, and I didn't realise it till a couple of days later. I was really anxious about it because I think it's hard putting yourself out there, and it definitely it can set you back if you get knocked back in this stuff. And I think there's a lot of vulnerability in what we do. We're constantly putting our point of view out, and it gets torn apart by every fucker looking at it. So I think that was like for me, sort of not, I wouldn't say a pitch moment, it was like probably the most significant moment of my career because I felt like I'd, for the first time, taken control. And it had been warmly embraced, which just felt amazing. But it's funny, I think, like I said, I did coast for a little while and sort of let other people make the decisions for me. It's an empowering moment to do that.
Yeah.
On the flip side of that, most embarrassing moment. So we did a pitch for Paddy Power years ago, old agency. And this was back at Naked Communications, and I was working then with a pitch team who were big fans of a lot of kind of like pitch theatre, bring the idea to life, that kind of stuff.
Okay, wow.
Still quite prominent now, but there was a creative idea called the Paddy Power Ranger. As you can imagine, there's a lot of stuff back then that probably wouldn't fly now. Paddy Power Ranger outfit, green, giant ginger wig. And it's pitching it to Paddy Power, who have a history of being quite outrageous, so it all felt right. And there was a song which had been made by the Barmy Army, cricket themed song. The idea was simple, right? So there would be like a visual gag where someone dressed up as the Paddy Power Ranger would walk into the pitch, sort of stand there, look like an idiot, walk out. Easy, fine. On the Friday night before the pitch, the guy who was supposed to be doing it was in the pub, super embarrassed. He's like, I don't want to do it. I was very drunk. I said, you know what? I'll do it. I'll pick up that baton. Mistake number one. Following week, pitch came, and there was a series of events leading up to the pitch, which I should have just realised this is bad news. One, they were like, can't do it at your office. Can you come and do it at ours? I was like, okay, so we're going to have to somehow go there. I had no other role on the pitch. I wasn't like presenting anything. I was just going to be a visual gag. And they were like, okay, well, look, we'll keep you outside the room and bring you in. Okay. It's in their boardroom. It's fine. There'll be waiting rooms outside. As we get there, we discover it's not in the boardroom. It's in like meeting room 52, which turned out to be the size of like a broom cupboard. I'm like, okay, well, that's fine. So, and on the way there, they're like, actually, and Lorenzo, do you think maybe you could like dance while we're playing the song? I was like, fuck. Well, in for it now. Okay, we'll go for it. We got there. I changed in the lift. Got introduced to the client team. Like walked in. I'm fully dressed in like skin tight latex with a ginger wig on, and they just, this is Lorenzo, creative. Nobody said anything. They just introduced me as that, and the guys looked at me like, who the fuck is this guy? We then went into this room, and this room was smaller than this space here. And there was three of us, two clients sat there, and me just kind of sitting there not saying anything. We're going through the pitch, and this is like back in the day where like didn't even have a proper sound system, so I had like a little portable CD player. And I knew it was coming, but I was so deeply already like mortified at having to do this, I kind of only half committed. So it came to the point in the presentation, at this point, obviously I've said nothing, not a single word, and they just lean over and press play. And I have to kind of stand up and dance, but I just can't do it. So I kind of half do it. I kind of put my hands on the table and just kind of stand up and just kind of wiggle. They couldn't look at me. They literally like just stared at the wall. They just literally, I was over there and they just couldn't make eye contact with me for the whole time. Just danced for the whole song.
How long was the song?
It was about 1.5 minutes. I just kind of sat down, carried on with the presentation, then left the room. Didn't win the pitch, obviously. Never got invited back. Well, actually, that's not true. We did get invited back several years later, and I wondered if they thought because they would bring back the Paddy Power Ranger. It's one of those things where, you know how over time things feel less embarrassing? Wrong.
That one feels more.
Every day.
Yeah.
I think we may want to cut that, but let's see how it goes. I think.
I mean, that is a great story.
It's fucking horrible, man. It was one of the worst. Yeah, it's even now it makes my stomach.
Did they not even?
Don't know if I want the world to know that.
Just didn't even get like there was no conversation about it after.
That was the thing. It was like I just sat back down and they just carried on as if nothing had happened.
Did no one else in your team? Were they just like that was really bad?
I think it dawned on people as we were going through, like this is a mistake. This is fundamentally a mistake. This has not played out the way we thought.
Oh, brilliant.
Pitch theatre.
Well, there we go. That is hopefully that makes it in because I really enjoyed that. But thank you so much. Like that was brilliant. I think that we've covered some really interesting stuff. And thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.